Welcome to V'ger Please. My name is Joseph.
I'm your co-host, Peter.
And if you are joining us for the first time, or for some reason this show appeared in your suggestions or something like that as a review of the TV show Star Trek Picard, don't worry, it is. Ignore the number on the side. This is episode 92, although it is episode 92 of our podcast. We are typically, Peter and I, reviewers of the seminal television program Star Trek Voyager. And boy, oh boy, do we have a cornucopia of content for you to review if that interests you. But first and foremost, Peter and I are long-term Star Trek nerds who essentially grew up watching TNG. And so we were intensely interested in doing reviews of Picard. So we have put aside our hateful voyage through the Delta Quadrant, as we like to call it.
Like you do when it's time to focus on the real Star Trek.
Yes, and have decided to pick up the mantle of Picard for the next 10 or so weeks as we tackle old friends, so to speak. So if you are joining us for the first time, welcome. You've come at the right time. And if after a few weeks of us reviewing Picard, you're like, I think these guys are not total trash, then you can go right ahead and see if our Voyager takes are to your liking. If not, well, go fuck off. I don't care. I hate you. So with that out of the way, we wanted to cut to the chase a little bit and discuss how we've arrived at this point. Because this is not the first time Peter and I have discussed Picard on this program. Obviously, it's been in production for some time. It's been of interest to both of us as huge fans of TNG. And Peter, you said something, it seems like an eternity ago, that feels very resonant. Do you remember what you said about the existence of this show?
This existence of this show is CBS in case of emergency breaking the glass and pulling the TNG lever to on.
Yeah, I would call it an act of desperation to go for this. There's a lot of background that maybe we'll discuss as we discuss the episode. Maybe we'll wait till the end to get into. But the very short form is that this show exists because Discovery has not been as successful for CBS, particularly CBS All Access, as they wanted it to be. And if you want to reinvigorate popular culture attention towards Star Trek, then hitting the big red TNG button is your best shot. And this is what this is. This is them pulling their biggest pop culture touchstone and laying it on the table and saying, let's see what this can do.
You got CBS pulling the Picard card. You got Sony taking Final Fantasy VII off the shelf for a remake 20 years in the making. It's a great time if you were in your teenage years back in the 90s.
Yeah, if you're a nerd in your mid to late 30s, 2020 is going to be lit.
Joe, let me tell you about my day at work today, because this, and again, ironically, at the 25-year anniversary mark for Voyager, they just completely ignore it and play the TNG card instead. But the episode came out today on CBS All Access. I woke up. I know you watched it first thing in the morning before you went to the gym, but I was going to have to watch it when I got off of work right before we recorded. And it's no secret that you and I have not been very impressed by the press materials that they've put out. The trailers, Data in particular, looked really rough, especially in the early ones. And my general standard operating procedure with stuff anymore is if I know I'm going to watch something, I stay away from the promotional materials as much as I can, because it's just spoilers. I know I'm going to watch it. You don't need to sell me, and I don't want to come in and rewatch material. I want to see it as it's intended. So I've got this episode looming over my head all day, and I'm terrified. And the only, I mean, we laugh about it, but like, TNG is my fucking shit, yo. And to have this episode of Picard, which I'm like 80% confident is just going to fucking blow ass. I watched all of the short treks, and the last couple ones were brutal. That Q&A session was especially terrible at how they treated Spock in number 1. So
Yeah, the all of the short trek stuff is pretty much garbage. I think Calypso from the prior season is the only one I would genuinely say is like good science fiction.
yeah,
And that could have just been a fucking, Outer Limits episode, or whatever. Like it didn't need to be Trek. I agree with you. I dreaded watching this. I would put my percentage at 80% likelihood that this was going to just absolutely chap my asshole
the feeling
completely raw.
The feeling of dread throughout the day for me was like you've got an old beloved family dog and it's the end of the line and its butt is falling out and there's blood and keeps peeing on the carpet and you know it's in pain and you have to finally say goodbye. And after I get home from work, we're going to have to take the dog to the vet and put her down. And that's just looming over me. And I do not want to come home and watch them take out my favorite childhood TV show and bring it behind the barn and instead of, shoot it in the head, just dry hump it until it falls apart.
TNG was my show. I'll do it.
So there was a sense of dread in me to watch this fucking thing. But I've watched it. We're here, and Picard season 1, episode 1, Remembrance.
So as I mentioned, I shared your dread. I watched it considerably earlier than you. I just couldn't afford to wait, and I happened to wake up early anyway to go to the gym, as you noted. And I was prepared to hate it. I had a small hope in my heart that it would pull it out and would be awesome. I guess I was somewhat unprepared for it to be pretty good, which is kind of how I took it. Not perfect, not quite great, but not terrible, and better than I was expecting is my overall take.
Expect the worst and hope to be, proven wrong.
My low expectations were surpassed.
I almost secretly wanted it to be a fucking dumpster fire just so I could write the whole goddamn thing off and say, this is just pure Kurtzman trash. I don't count this. I reject this.
Same.
This is so bad it can't possibly be in continuity and we're going to be done. And like you, and then, my wife even was like, hey, I want to sit in and watch this with you. And I was like, okay, well, I hope the baby doesn't go ballistic like she did through short treks. But she watched it. And I mean, she came out pretty good. And my wife, to be fair, also a super huge fan of Discovery season 1. So that newer generation of not traditional Trek viewership, they're getting their claws out there. And I see it sinking into her. So this episode, and if there's one thing I think we can both say about Discovery, and I think we'll both say about this, is they don't cut corners on the special effects, and those visual effects are beautiful. The opening sequence of them flying around through the galaxy and showing off like neat spaceship, really fucking cool.
Yeah, if this show had a subtitle, it's fucking money. They spent it all. Cannot say they spared any expense, and like you, there was something comforting about the idea of being able to dismiss this as Kurtzman trash. And if you are new to our discussions about Trek, be advised. I hate Alex Kurtzman. That chucklefuck nightmare fuel of a goblin has fucked my favorite franchise directly into the dirt by his inability to be able to form coherent scripts. This hack fraud has somehow managed to ruin like 3 movie franchises and just is awful. And I hate Discovery. I hate it with every fiber of my being. It's bad at being a TV show and it's bad at being Star Trek. And having his baleful touch anywhere on this was just absolutely, to me, a sign of terrible things. But I think the Michael Chabon influence won out. And there's definitely some Kurtzman kind of schmutz on this thing, but it pulls it out in the end, in I think dramatic fashion, and led me to be very interested to watch more.
I like your subtitle that you've given this, Picard season 1, episode 1, Remembrance, or as they say around the lot, it takes money to make money. Maybe that could be our episode title.
It takes money to make money. Okay, that's it. We already did it. We're 10 minutes in. We found the title. That's a new record.
Cacao. Jumping back into short treks real quick. I've been very aware as I watch those at the presence of Fuller's name, especially now that we've reached that season of Voyager where he starts becoming prominent. I was surprised to see his name carried through until the very last short trek, yet it is completely absent from everything on this Picard thing.
Yeah, he basically gets EP credit on anything having to do with Discovery because he was part of the conception of the show before they ran him off because he had too many good ideas. His name gets put on that stuff, but he's had nothing to do with Discovery since before season 1 started, let alone any short treks. It's a contractual thing because he's got creator credit on it, and that's how they pay him. So he didn't have anything to do with this. The guy that I credited before, Michael Chabon, his influence is important. I don't want to go too deep on this, but he was brought in about a third of the way through shooting as a new showrunner after the first one was essentially fired. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning author. He's a huge Trek fan, deep nerd Trek fan, and obviously a talented writer. And there was a lot of hope that the show was going to be better because he was going to be able to give it a clear creative vision. And I think you can accredit a lot. I know I can accredit a lot of what I liked about this to someone like him getting his hands on it. Because we know people like Kurtzman can't give two fucks about continuity and making shit work in like Trek. They're fucking scared of it. And what this show does better than anything that's been produced in Star Trek for almost 15 years is that it honors the storytelling of Star Trek authentically. That I think is probably his doing, and I'm looking forward to watching more of the show because of my hope that creative vision is actually going to be born through. But let's talk about the episode, Peter. Where do we start?
We start in all places. The Enterprise D. 1701D. That's our Galaxy class baby cakes flying through the galaxy of beautiful nebula while the old song, and forgive me for not knowing it off the top of my head, that Picard and Data used to sing. It was kind of the giveaway at the end of Nemesis that maybe Data was shining through in the old body of B4. But
Blue Skies by Irving Berlin.
There you go.
Yeah.
But things are not right. And like any good basement dwelling Star Trek fanboy, my cackles are instantly raised. And I'm like, why would Data be wearing a First Contact jumpsuit on the D? That's physically impossible. That did not come until First Contact, and First Contact was on the Enterprise E. Continuity errors, but we see Picard sitting there in like a t-shirt and jeans, and it starts tipping us off that things are not going to be what they seem.
I will say head nod and hat tip to the fact that they have abandoned bullshit 24th century civilian fashion and have restored themselves to normal people fucking clothing.
Dude, that's my one biggest gripe in this fucking...
Oh, what? I loved it. I love that. Like, oh, okay, now we're no longer wearing weird spandex jumpsuits 24/7.
No, I need that stuff. Because look, man, so I'm the whole time home. I'm just driving home, sour. I got to watch this thing, ready to have my nostalgia finger banged, right? So I'm coming up with like, well, how am I going to make hating on this thing funny? And, you know, I get this thought train, and it's like 90s budget television, you know, is inappropriate basically for 2020 post Game of Thrones golden age of television, right? But it's not, because you look at stuff like Orville, which is like fully invested in 90s Berman era Trek, and it still works. It's still acceptable. It feels good, and everything doesn't have to be super high budget. So I was almost like, God, I hope there are like leotards and like velvet jumpsuits and all that stuff, or at least something that I can really laugh at and be like, this is terrible future clothing that we have had very clear continuity. Like, this is how these fucking people dress in the future. Everybody looks like they just walked off of some jazzercise video set. But no, you're right. All the fashion, sadly, has come around, and everybody does look great. But what's hard to look at is this 10-4 they're sitting in. It's a CG recreation of 10 Forward, and for a place we've spent so much time. And there's nothing wrong with the CG. Like it's okay, but it's not real. And there's that part in me that just really, really wanted it to be real. I've watched so many people get thrown through glass tables in this room that I wanted it so bad.
The dream sequence with Data here, Data looks
terrible.
He looks rough, and I don't know. Like, we live in a world now where you could like use CG to make dead people appear in movies.
Arkin looked dope.
Sure, yeah, and
Leo looked
I'm
good.
not sure why they couldn't CG this situation more. Like, no one is blaming Brent Snyder for being old.
No.
Like, that has happened. He cannot play an ageless android anymore just using caked on makeup and a wig. So let's sculpt this situation with some CG. Let his performance guide that CG, and it's going to look way better, especially because it's just a dream sequence. It's not like you're going to have to do this a lot, and instead it just looks filthy.
I will say,
the way that I would say.
His second encounter he has with Data out in the vineyard during the painting scene looked significantly better.
Agreed. I don't know if that was maybe shot later. I get this. I have the suspicion it was.
There was certainly enough criticism from the internet that I think the budget would have been justified in sprucing those scenes up. But there we've got Data. He's wearing the First Contact style uniform, and he's playing some poker with Picard right up there in 10 Forward, and they're bouncing back and forth. Picard remarks that sees that Data's trying to trick him with false tells. There's some pretty playful banter. It feels good. I like what I see. It's hard seeing Picard look that old. It's hard seeing Data look that bad. Makes me aware that all good things must come to the end, and that, this childhood fantasy can't just go on forever. That, these are real people getting old. And at the same time, it makes me treasure the fact that even if this thing turns out to be complete fucking dog shit fire, I'm getting something.
I think that in particular to Patrick Stewart's performance as Picard and the fact that he appears old, I think it's fair that he does. I mean, in universe, he is 90 by the time this happens, right? He was born at the beginning of the 24th century. This is literally happening in the last year of the 24th century, 2399. And so he's older in universe than he is in real life. I feel like he played up his age a bit. Like, you see him in interviews, he's much more like not old, He's the man, like, apparently lives at the gym. He looks like 20 years younger than he actually is. I get it, though. Like, this is a Picard in the twilight of his life. It's actually part of the motivation of why he chooses to act when we get to the end, of course. I thought it was appropriate to where the character is. I was expecting, like, maybe his age would be off-putting, but I think it worked well in the story of, like, yeah, he's almost 100 years old. He's even in the Federation's, time period of super medicine, he's going to be fucking old.
He should just count himself lucky that he'd ended up like Bones, where it looked like he had garbage bags super glued to his face for the initial shakedown.
Exactly.
I've seen TNG old people makeup, and Jean-Luc, just be happy you were not subjected to that. His portrayal in this scene specifically, it's like he was very friendly, very warm. Him sitting there playing poker, I thought initially they were going to be going into one of the senior officer poker sessions, but he was very warm, very almost loving towards Data. And I was like, man, was that really how their relationship was? Or is this a Picard who has lost, remembering and acting differently in the moment, ways he wishes he had? And I think by the fact it's a dream, we get the answer to that. They end up dropping themselves in front of Mars, Utopia Planitia, the birthplace of the Enterprise D, just in time to watch the whole fucking place blow up, and the Enterprise D along with it.
So, important to note that in Children of Mars, the short trek, which is otherwise complete garbage, and you shouldn't watch it, fucking awful, the important plot point, which is reiterated in this episode, is that some decade prior, Mars is attacked by rogue synthetic life. which is, of course, activates my brain in all of our discussions about AI, which we're gonna fucking get to. And it's pretty awful. Like, Mars is destroyed. The Utopia Planitia shipyards, which is the place the D was built, the biggest shipyard operated by the Federation, has destroyed. I believe at one point it mentioned like Mars's atmosphere is on fire to this day. So a decade later, it's literally burning.
Let's call this for what it is,
because of this.
And that is Space 9/11.
It is Space 9/11 for the Federation, yes.
And this is going to be a turning point in the mantra of Starfleet and the Federation. And we will later come to find out that because of these events, Starfleet doctrine is radically altered. So big picture of what's going on in the universe, right? We jump over the J.J. Abrams Kelvin verse, and we find out that Spock had to go back in time. Spock got knocked back in time because Romulus' son was going to go supernova, and that has continued over into mainline Trek.
Yeah, that occurrence in mainline Trek is what led to the JJ verse, because what essentially happens is that in his effort to contain the supernova, Ambassador Spock, old Spock, gets sucked into a into a black hole that spits him out into a parallel past version of his own universe. Like, so that supernova happens in the prime timeline. That's how the JJ verse actually occurs to begin with. And I quibble a bit with the idea that this Space 9/11 should have been so impactful to the Federation. I feel like the writers may have missed a bit on accepting DS9's impact on what happened to the Federation during the Dominion War, which would have occurred just a few years prior to all of this. It's awful. Like, Beta Z is conquered. Millions of people die. Not thousands, millions. And that doesn't seem to be nearly as much a factor as this event. I kind of wish they would have acknowledged that in some way or something. Like, I get what they're trying to set up, but the Federation has gone through horrible shit before, and the attack on Mars, while terrible, isn't actually as bad as some of the shit that happened during DS9.
So let's jump considerably further in the episode for a couple minutes, and I'm going to throw out some of my conspiracy theories here, because as always, I'm going to have to rely on you as the crutch for DS9. I have not watched DS9 yet, and really it seems like Starfleet goes through some very heavy changes as an entity because of that Dominion War. The Mars 9/11, not Space 9/11 incident, right? You have crippled the main shipyard of the Starfleet production. The Armada. Okay, so Romulan's going to go down. Picard leaves the Enterprise to spearhead the rescue attempts for Romulus. And the Romulan Star Empire has asked the Federation for help in getting all of its residents off of there. I forget what the exact number was, but there
900 million people.
No, the ships, the Armada.
Oh, 10,000 warp-capable ferries.
And Picard's leading the logistics on ferrying all these people and getting them to safety. From what they said during this little newscast, and that's where the majority of this information comes from, is a Picard interview. When Utopia Planitia gets blown up, like, the rescue fleet somehow gets blown up in the process. So I don't know if they're inferring that, like, that Armada hasn't actually launched yet and it was just in production or what. But losing their biggest shipyard, losing all of these ships that were supposed to be dedicated to this Romulan thing, on top of whatever happened in the Dominion Wars, is what prompts... Oh, and also this synth uprising, major malfunction of your service appliances, is what kind of starts turning Starfleet insular. And I think that as this show unfolds, we are going to discover probably some sort of a grand conspiracy where 9/11 was an inside job, that they just needed a catalyzing event to get public support away from saving Romulus. And yeah, the Federation's gone through worse shit in the Dominion War, but this whole thing was engineered to leave the Romulans hanging.
Upon reflection, I think you're right. And that makes so much sense to you and I's discussions through the years now of the Federation's overall moral decay, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, yes, qualitatively, worse things happen to the Federation overall, but we know that the Federation is deeply corrupt, right? We saw that in Focus and DS9. I think TNG tells a compelling story, maybe even a little bit on accident, of the Federation's flaws. I mean, something that we bonded over early in our friendship was an article about Jean-Luc Picard and his crew members were more an exception than the rule of Federation ethics. And that's kind of why they were like pigeonholed where they were, because they weren't willing to bend or break the rules the same way that
everybody else was. And, I'm sitting here thinking on my conspiracy theory options, and God, wouldn't it be fucking hot if like the little bug stem things from conspiracy
from season 1
turn out to be like the fucking ultimate big bads in this whole thing? You're like, motherfuckers, we were here the whole time. You thought you got us when you blew up Remick, but we're still here. Yeah, so I think we're gonna see some pretty dirty pool going on, and really being the catalyzing factor on why Starfleet kind of shit the bed on that whole thing. But so Mars blows up. Picard wakes up, and we find that he is not on the Enterprise D bridge, but in fact just an old dude sleeping in the house where vicious fires have killed off his entire family. And looks like he's put in some restoration efforts. And was it Chateau Picard?
Yep,
is
Chateau Picard
back in full production. And I wanna talk about the post-scarcity society of the Federation, the mega boom in population of growth and prosperity. How does one go about having a huge ass farm in like the densely populated world of tomorrow? Like, that seems like such a fucking waste of space when you've got replicators and you don't need to farm, especially booze. How do you, in a non-capitalistic society, how does one person have that much goddamn land still, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, we never get into the ethics of owning property or having possession of property in a post-capitalistic, utopian, idealistic, post-scarcity universe. I do think there is precedent in throughout Trek of like people actually liking things that are grown,
sure,
and it tasting different and being superior to that which comes out of a holodeck. So like the demand for this to exist, I agree with. I think that it's probably one of those things where, because obviously space exploration and colonization has occurred, there's almost infinite space for people to live. So there might not be a demand to like, oh, we got to start putting apartment blocks up in your farm, Jean-Luc. Sorry.
I agree. And I know you didn't get deep in Expanse, but they actually kind of answered that question for me, because Earth gets like super duper densely populated and people are just chomping at it. When they do finally have viable, ready to go planets to colonize, like it almost causes a civil war, because people are in such a rush to get the fuck up out and go out there where there's, like you said, infinite possibilities. So we've talked before about what life in the Federation would be like, why warp travel is so important, and it's exactly that reason. There's always enough to go around, whether it's food or land or adventure. Space has got what you're looking for.
We are a half hour in, and we have only talked about the first scene. So, in the effort of keeping our hopefully new viewers from abandoning us immediately, let us continue. Our next scene is actually an intro of a young lady that we will find out is named Daj, who is hanging out with her cool pseudo-reptilian boyfriend in Boston.
Neo-Boston.
Doing normal millennial shit, which is hanging out on a couch drinking wine.
I introduced this scene as now the characters I don't care about.
And, they're hanging out, and the Daj is celebrating being accepted by the Daystrom Institute. She notably says, dude.
Yes.
Which was so weird to hear, but also, like, I kind of understand why someone would still be saying dude. Like, I get it.
I'm like, damn you, back in my day, kids your age were wearing silver jumpsuits playing Hoover-Doo with Wesley in the Forbidden Gardens. None of this dude and drinking milkshakes, waving my fist around. Fortunately, before I could really come to loathe these people, the guy ends up with a knife in his chest.
Yeah, like 4 heavies that we are speaking Romulan, and we'll find out later are Romulan, show up, knife the dude, and are clearly after Daj and trying to see if she's quote unquote activated. It's clear she is their target. They try to black bag her, and that's when she goes all Black Widow on them and suddenly knows Kung Fu and murders the dick out of all of the people that came to murder her.
So,
which makes her a little sad.
Did you recognize those guys as Romulan right off the bat?
I heard the sound and I knew it wasn't a Klingon and assumed, given the predominance of Romulans in the plot, that they were Romulan. I did not recognize the language directly as Romulan.
There was
right off
an
the
aesthetic
bat.
There. I think I was like, these guys. Anytime there's like treachery, treasonous, ninja-ness on this level, it's Romulan. I wanted to roll my eyes when she beat the fuck out of everybody, but the action in this scene and later on the rooftop, pretty fucking legit, man. Like, I was like, I really want to hate this. Like, this chick with her Jay Leno jaw, I want to not like her, but that was pretty dope. So, okay. That one dude got a knife in the chest. You know, I'm good with this. Yeah,
she the actress did a good job. I don't know if it was her or a stunt person, but boy, oh boy, somebody did some good stunt work in portraying this lady as a fucking super ninja. She kind of meditates on some thought in her mind, and she sees Picard's face, and then we cut away. That's when we finally get the credits. C- credit sequence, in my opinion.
Lower than that.
Music was forgettable. Visuals were actual spoilers. Like, just the
music.
It's not. And
I called the Hallmark Channel music intro fucking trash.
Yeah,
even my wife's like, "What the hell was that?" Because Discovery's got a pretty good one.
The music for Discovery's good. Yeah, this was just kind of like, what the fuck was that? It was just forgettable. I was actively disappointed by what I heard. But whatever. They move back to Chateau Picard. We get a little time with Jean-Luc and his adorable pupper, a pit bull named Number One, which I thought was great. Who he speaks to in French, which, if I recall, is like the very fucking first time Picard speaks French. The Frenchman spoke French. Yeah. We finally did it, guys. We got there. And we find them back at the house, and that's when we meet 2 supporting characters that you probably don't know who they are if you didn't read the comic book that they put out in advance of the show.
Count me among those people.
I imagine so. They're Laris and Zaban, and they are among the Romulans that Picard is ultimately responsible for rescuing.
They are the first and only Romulans I think I've ever seen who do not have your how do we describe Romulan hair? A worse version of Vulcan hair.
Yeah, like page boy haircut, page like boy. Your mom cut it.
First time you ever see Romulan male pattern baldness. It's, it's inclusive stuff.
They got Irish accents and shit. Like, they're very different. And their characters are introduced in the comic. They're actually the Romulan equivalent of Vintners, where they come from. And so them working here makes a tremendous amount of sense. And we find out that Picard is actually lined up to do an interview with the Federation News Network. His very first interview ever since he left Starfleet, because it is the decade anniversary of the supernova that destroyed Romulus, and it is a passion of his to educate people about the travesty of that event.
Picard's in a proper suit with a tie and a jacket, and that jacket has a standing collar a la Burke from Aliens, keeping the future standing collar dream alive, which was really cool. Picard and the Romulans, you got to really appreciate how big of a deal they are in his life. Like, that was the end of season 1 of TNG, was like the Romulans have finally come out of hiding in the neutral zone with the interaction with Tomaluk. And like, there's a few real big touchstone moments where it's Picard at the forefront of trying to mend this very old wound with Romulus. And, you know, you can say what you want about Nemesis, but it was an interesting place to leave off, and it's an interesting place for them to start up again in this series.
Yeah, his personal history with Romulus up to and including the very last time we saw them is very appropriate. Like, this has been a major point in his intersection with galactic history, quite frankly. And his desire to help the Romulan people, you know, of all people that would do so, feels very authentic coming from him as a moral figure. The scene that follows is by far the worst fucking one in the whole goddamn episode, and it held back my enjoyment of the episode as a whole. The interview with the stereotypical journalist figure.
What did you call it? The Federation
Nothing felt
News Network? Was that
Federation News Network?
Is that legit?
Yeah.
Is that what they called it?
Yeah, FNN, Federation News Network.
Darius on our trauma support group pointed out something very interesting in whatever the last short trek was, where Mars is actually destroyed, and it's that, you know, we see Admiral Picard on the news talking like some sort of news pundit. When TNG was out, our world was such a different place. At really kind of the dawn of the 24-hour news cycle and CNN and this other stuff, not to say anything about social media, and to even wonder, like, in the Federation, which was established for us in the 90s, like, what is news? What is fake news? How do people interact? What is the internet of the next generation? And seeing like kind of the face of it here, like, yeah, I agree, it's a hokey scene that you know exactly what's going to happen right off the jump, but just trying to conceptualize something that just could not exist back when TNG was founded under Roddenberry is a real exercise.
I don't mind there being journalists and news and a news network or news, you know, agency or something like that. What I found so cringy about this is that it's literally, here is a cutout of a 20th century journalist that is kind of smarmy and shitty and does this one-on-one with this figure and purposefully like tries to do some fucking Frost Nixon bullshit for no reason and violates all the rules, and it's just kind of a total bitch. And it's like, I have to believe that, oh, and it's totally racist, just like openly towards Romulans. They're not real people. I just have to believe that at this point, craft of journalism would have evolved over 400 years, you know? Just a little bit. It's so bad. Like, feels like such a Kurtzman scene because it's so it's such a hack thing, you know? Like, oh, we need to do all of this exposition for the viewer. We have to catch them up what's going on. Oh, we'll have them do an interview on TV, on space TV. And, you know, we'll have the shitty interviewer be shitty to him, and they'll allow him to be, you know, express his righteous indignation. That'll be what we do.
As a way to catch the viewership up on what has happened over the past 20 years. It's obviously very effective. As far as her being like openly racist towards Romulans, again, if we're going to build into a conspiracy theory that Space 9/11 was an inside job, I do appreciate seeing that there is a visible portion of Earth's population that would be so anti-Romulan. And I can't say how relations end in DS9 between the Federation and the Romulans, but that's one of the things about all the Star Treks is you always kind of just get the military viewpoint. It's very rare to see the civilian outlook.
We've already kind of discussed a lot of the background of what happened, what they discuss. Picard gives a nice speech where he expresses why he left Starfleet, which is that he became very disgusted by their moral decay, and that their desire, the decision to not help the Romulans was something they couldn't stand for. And this is that decision. I don't like the scene, but I did like what it set up Picard to have done in his past and why he's in the position that he's in.
The other interesting part of this conversation is her focus on synthetics. And we haven't really talked about this at all. And I think this is kind of the masterful stroke of this and what's steered me away from being critical and into being accepting. Picard takes what I found to be an awkward, like super pro AI standpoint. And on one hand, you can say, well, he was like thick as thieves with data. Like, of course he's going to be pro AI. But then you hear about basically we're like synth servants on Mars going rogue and causing space 9/11. And in that moment, I'm like, that's exactly what Data was afraid of, was non-sentient AI or non-sentient robot slaves, right? There was that whole Measure of a Man and Maddox and all that other stuff that they fought so hard to say that Data is a unique life form and he cannot just be disassembled and copied and put into mass production. We just talked about all of this in Living Witness when we were talking about what if the Doctor was a Soong type android in that little fantasy that they rolled out, and just how rare true AI is in the galaxy as a whole, and how infrequently Berman era Star Trek talked about AI and robots in general within
and the moral implications of it. Like, and this is, of course, I know we're sort of already baiting the trap here, but this is where this entire episode turns around and suddenly becomes extraordinarily interesting because it decides to actually tackle those questions, which you and I have discussed for almost 100 episodes of our podcast about how interesting it would be if it did. Right.
Mass Effect. Like,
and this,
we get
here
the
we
taste
are.
of what if Mass Effect had its hooks in Star Trek, and the Geth and all that other stuff that they represent was there, and it's potent. And again, for at the end of it, Picard to say, I think that the abandonment of the research into synthetics and AI was a grievous mistake, was shocking to hear come from him. And I like my favorite part of this interview, and she's like, was there any point that you lost confidence in Lieutenant Commander Data? And Picard's like, never. And I'm like, bro, do you have like brain damage from Borg needles going in your fucking brain, or the Tchaikovsky virus from like episode 2? Like, every other episode, Data was hijacking your shit to the point where I would say not like having an emergency kill switch on him was like criminally negligent on your behalf because you had 1 million kids on the ship. Like, yeah, he was your homeboy, but like, if anybody should know goddamn well that these things go haywire at the drop of a fucking, not even to mention his patented evil twin brother lore. Like,
I did love the, oh, no one knows why all the synths went rogue, and like Picard doesn't go, well, there's a lot of reasons why.
Well, perhaps
like,
the question,
I personally experienced many reasons why this one happened.
Perhaps the right question to ask is, why would they work properly? Yeah.
You know, they've got a pretty large fail rate, guys. I don't know if you've read my logs, but it's pretty rough out there.
Did I ever tell you why we had to change the Enterprise to fingerprint recognition? Because he just kept copying my voice. Like, oh boy.
One thing I wanted to say at this point, and I felt was cool about Picard and the Federation and Starfleet in general. I don't know if I've asked you this question before. Have you seen the TV show The Wire? The Wire, to break it down to its essence, is about the failure of institutions. And each season, a different institution is front and center, but the lesson's always the same. And that is, institutions by their very nature are corrupt, and each person within those institutions have to make a choice about accepting the fact that their institution is corrupt and subsuming themselves into it and being part of it, or rejecting it but suffering the consequences of the rejection, which, if it's, you know, street gang, could be death. If it's, you know, the police department, could be being put in an undesirable assignment or fired, that sort of thing. And it makes so much sense to me that the Starfleet and Federation is no different than any other institution, which is to say it's capable of corruption, and Picard is not a person to accept corruption. He is a person that rejects it. And so he rejected this. And it's like, this is a perfect character note, right? Like, no, I'm not going to be part of this. I'm not going to be a spectator to your dishonorable and criminal behavior.
So the question's asked, what's the straw that broke your back to get you to quit Starfleet? And, they're like, okay, well, Starfleet's decision to withdraw from the galactic community and leave the Romulans hanging. That was the straw. And I'm like, really? That's all the bad shit that you've seen go down, from like insurrection, crazy admirals kidnapping this and cooperating with these. Like, I mean, there's every time Picard interacts with Starfleet Admiralty, it's usually Picard's a good guy and one of the admirals is crazy and doing some bonker shit and he needs to pull it on. So I think, like you said, that is the right straw to break his back. When there is a unified front against him and everybody says, no, we do not support this. The Romulan thing, which has basically been his baby from the beginning, with his first contact with Tomluk on the neutral zone, all of his stuff during unification with Spock on that, like, for there to be such a cold shoulder to basically his life's work, right? An excellent time for him to finally say, I've put up with a lot of bullshit wearing this uniform, but this is the point I can no longer ignore it, and fuck you, I'm out.
Important notes that came from the Ready Room episode that came after this, which is the like discussion of like from the producers and that sort of thing, is that Michael Chabon said that Picard specifically intended for his resignation to be a ploy to force the Federation to honor its commitment to rescue the Romulans, not that he actually wanted to quit. And he was basically, his bluff got called and they said, sure, your resignation is accepted.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, so it could lead back to the discussion we had previously about this is what the Federation wanted. They wanted to dispose of Jean-Luc Picard and his moralizing, and this was an added bonus for them to be able to be rid of him at last.
Three-dimensional chess deep shit, man. That's good.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see if that actually pays off.
Where's this Ready Room thing at? Is that like a...
It's a CBS All Access thing.
Oh.
So
it's another thing I got to click on. I got you.
Yeah. We resume. Dodge sees the interview on TV. And so she knows, like, oh, that's Jean-Luc Picard, and he lives in France, so I should go there.
Presumably on the global transporter network that we found out in the Harry Kim.
Yes. And we will see happen, apparently. See, Picard gets around in this episode. We cut back after Dodge's revelation to Chateau Picard, and he's, chilling on his porch quoting Shakespeare, as you do when you're Patrick Stewart, drinking wine, which when Dodge shows up and explains, like, what happened to her, including the ninja part. And Picard is like, I have seen enough shit to not assume you're crazy and that there's a reason why all of this is happening. You seem to be telling me the truth. I am actually a good judge of character, so I got to read on you that you're not fucking with me.
Did I ever mention that I know a god and that he fixed my heart once? Yeah, I know about some shit because I've seen some shit. Go on.
Yeah,
let's indulge.
Yeah, this is not by far the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me.
I was turned into a child once and I had to crawl around an elevator shaft. Oh, no, that was a separate child incident. I drew a smiley face. He was stuck with children. In a warp core breach, yeah. What is the most cringy thing that we've ever seen out of Picard?
I would say when he's turned into a kid and he whines.
Yeah.
It's definitely Rascals. Rascals is the worst. That's an episode of TNG so bad it's painful to know it exists.
It's hard to turn a Ro Laren episode into a dud, but by God, they found a way.
They have a little sit down with her. The dog is chilling and likes her, which is like a clue that she's not a threat. And the Romulans are helping, heal her wound and gonna give her a place to sleep. They have like a heart to heart about her sense of identity, and we get a quick look at this necklace she's wearing, There's like these interlocking rings
He's like,
on
that's
it.
a very rare piece of jewelry. And it's like, that looks like every piece of fucking Tiffany's silver jewelry I've ever seen, Picard. Like,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen that shit at a Ren fair. So
speaking of jewelry, what's the pin
big
he's
miss
wearing?
on that not being. What's yeah, he's got a pin on. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Like some sort of like
Maybe,
always remember Romulan, never forget.
yeah, that's good. That might be like a yellow ribbon type of thing. Maybe a sharp-eyed fan will tell us. The fact that we're at 52 minutes here and we're not quite halfway through, I'm gonna go ahead and call it now that this is gonna be a two-parter. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this will be the end of part 1 because we're about to kind of like get into the meat of the action of the episode, and you can hear us on part 2 of our discussion about Picard shortly after. So we'll see you then. Hey, this is Joseph from the editing room letting you know thanks for listening to V'ger Please for our first ever episode about Picard. You might have heard we've got new theme music there at the beginning. That's thanks to Ian and Sarah, who went ahead and did a bad recorder cover of the Inner Light flute music on demand. They're awesome. Thank you, guys. And if you want to hear the rest of our discussion about Picard, don't worry, you won't have to wait long. We'll have that out to you on Wednesday. And I assure you, we've got even more hot takes. Between now and then, if you want to keep in touch with us or listen to other episodes, by all means do so. You can reach us at V'gerPlease@gmail.com or join us at Facebook at V'gerPlease. We even have a Facebook group there where we love to talk to people who listen to the show. All right, take care, folks. See you in a couple days.